Hello, Ray Lee with Speedboat Magazine here with another episode of Boats and Bros podcast with your host, Myra Coyle. Today, our guest is the legendary Mr. Bob Teague. Bob, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I got to get out of work early today because I had to come home where I got good internet.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, Bob, I guess let's just start from the beginning. How did you get into the industry and into boating altogether?
Well, I was a guy that was always kind of a boat nut, but in high school I was, like the assistant teacher in auto shop and everything and did a lot of street racing back in those days, cars, whatever, but evolved to boats.
Where was this at, Bob? Where was this at?
I was in the San Fernando Valley, I was born in Van Nuys and grew up in Northridge and,
I see.
And so the Valley, they call it the Valley
of California,
the real Valley, whatever. And so anyway, when I was 17, I bought a Campbell flat bottom and built it and had believe it or not, a 425 Buick nail head in it and a Halibrand V drive. And I was the only guy in my group that had a boat. So, we would all go water skiing and stuff and everything, and I was always working on boats. And
what was the reason they called it a nail head?
That's what the Buicks were called then. It's just the way the cylinder heads were, and they just called them nail heads, and kind of
like a Harley has vintage, a flat head.
Yeah, right. They called it a nail head, and so anyway, I did that for a while, but. And I was after high school, I started college, but I couldn't, keep up with, I was working full time and everything, pretty much living on my own. And, I got drafted in, 1968. And, so that, I went in on a buddy system with a bunch of guys in the Army and, I was selected to go to an NCO school and jump school and all that kind of stuff and ended up at the top of that class. And, it gave me the ability to go into more sophisticated training because at that time it was inevitable. You're going to Vietnam, and so I took the opportunity to get as much training as I could, and then I ended up being a drill sergeant for a while in Fort McClellan, Alabama, and for AIT infantry, and then after that, I had to go to Vietnam to as an honor guard to get one of my friends that I went in there with, one of my best friend actually, that he got killed over there. So I had to come home and stand guard with that. But then I went back to Fort McClellan, and then I got a 2-week stand down before I shipped over to Vietnam. And when I went over there, I was assigned to a long range infantry platoon, in the first 2 or 3 months that I was there, I was second in command, and the lieutenant would always keep getting killed, and so I would end up taking over. And ultimately, I ended up as a battlefield temporary commission to first lieutenant, and ran the platoon for the whole rest of the time I was there. And we were in Cambodia when we weren't in Cambodia, and we also led the Cambodian offensive in early 1970. And so, I had a pretty rough go at it, but survived it. And when I got out, I went from being a infantry platoon leader in the bush, and 3 days later, I was a civilian. That's kind of how
big change, huh?
Big change, yeah. So I came back late 1970 and started getting my act together and going back to school and all that stuff. I was a much better student after that, and then in 1972, I wanted to start a boat business, and so it was just me, and I figured it was going to support my racing habit or desire. And fortunately, I got hooked up with Bob Nordskog, and he was kind of like an adopted father to me. And
the founder of Powerboat Magazine.
The founder of Powerboat Magazine, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, he's the Iron Man, and
yeah,
he didn't really start racing until he was a little older. He had a business to get going and all that kind of stuff, and so we were not just racing offshore, but we're racing inboard tunnel boats. And he'd actually won the Parker Enduro 9-hour race, drove the whole race in a flat bottom in the 60s. So they called him Iron Man because of that.
And by flat bottom, what is that? So a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, it's a V-drive boat, endurance boat, and the same as a Grand National boat is now, but they were not quite as easy riding then, and probably not as fast. But a Grand National is a marathon boat, which I also raced like 20 years of that too, and starting in 1977. But Bob,
the year I was born.
Yeah. So there you go. That's actually where my number came from, 77, because I just started racing that boat in 77. I'd already been racing with all the Nordskog stuff before that, because I basically joined the Powerboat Magazine test team in 1973. And at the same time, I had the opportunity to go on the LA City Fire Department, which,
decision
would provide me
had to be made, huh?
Yeah, well, I had to have a regular income, and the benefits and all that stuff. And a bunch of guys that were on the fire department, said, "Hey, you got to try to get on." In those days, there was like 12,000 applicants for, maybe 200 jobs, and so, but the military guys got bonused. So like my score was like 108 or something like that, pretty hard to beat. So I did get on, and I went up through the ranks in the fire department for a while. I was an auto fireman, an engineer, captain, and then captain to task force commander. But also along the way, I was the equipment engineering officer for the city of Los Angeles, and we designed I designed and purchased fire engines and trucks and helicopters and all kinds of stuff. So, a lot of
mechanical stuff. Yeah. A lot of making sure the quality of the product and all that stuff, how it was made. That's cool.
Yeah. And I came back and I finished the junior college out at Pierce and Woodland Hills. And then I went to Cal State Northridge, which is a university, my business degree. And then for the fire department, I went to another junior college, a fire science degree, Valley College, they call it. And then I went to Cal State LA, and I got a bachelor's degree in public administration and fire protection administration technology. So the last time I graduated was in 1981. And so,
wow.
Going to school,
you have a whole wall full of certificates of some kind, I guess, because it sounds
and I don't get a discount for any of this at Starbucks, So anyway, I was working with Powerboat, going to college, on the fire department, and running Teague Custom Marine all at the same time.
Wow, not a whole lot of sleep, I guess.
And racing. Oh yeah, a lot of all-nighters, And so with Nordskog, the first time I raced an offshore boat by myself was probably in 74, and it was a 27 Magnum with a pair of Johnson Stingers on it, went 58 miles an hour. And at that time, we had a 35 Mistress, one of the very first flat deck race boats. And in 1977,
what power was in that?
Well, in those days, it was a naturally aspirated, injected or carbureted, like 500. It was an open class boat. That's what they called it at the time.
Yeah.
And we set the open class nautical mile record. It was like a kilo, but at that time it was a nautical mile record. It was actually done in the ocean. And we Bob set the nautical mile record. At that time was the fastest boat, 90.555.
Wow. That's wrong.
That was like in 1976. And at that time, nobody's ever going to go faster than that. And we were just hanging out. We're hanging out. Now, you got to remember that the all the offshore boats then, open class, everything was all V-bottoms. There was no catamarans. Yeah. And so they had different classes, and they were basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 open. And that was it. And so, and this was all APBA at the time. And,
is that on the West Coast or the East Coast, Bob?
Well, this was all together then.
Okay.
That was all together then. So, the reason that Ray asked that in about late 1979, 1980, the West and the East split. And it had to do with a deal that fell apart with Bob Nordskog, gave APBA a whole bunch of money to put the Worlds on the West Coast. And and they kept his money and didn't do it. And so anyway, what happened was we formed our own organization on the West Coast and had our own rules, and had Pacific Offshore Powerboat Racing Association was the APBA club at the time, which basically got put to the side, and we raced under Marathon Boat Racers Association at the time. And so Bob Nordskog and his staff put on about 8 races a year on the West Coast. And every once in a while we would go, to the other side,
Yeah. The dark side, right?
To the dark side. Yeah. So in 1990, APBA formed the commission set up, for the offshore commission and everything. And I was nominated and elected as the Western commissioner. And so I've held a lot of different positions. In fact, almost all voluntary positions you could think of, between chief referee and chief inspector and tech chairman, and done all that. So I think we need to give back if we can. And so anyway, I convinced Bob that, we need to try to work out the thing and get the East and the West back together. And so what we did was put together, and the other financial part got resolved. So John Culver was the tech chairman for APBA, and I was the tech chairman for Pacific Offshore and MBRA. And so we got together and came up with a set of rules that both sides could race under. And it, took some time, quite a few meetings back and forth, some personal stuff, but we finally came up with an acceptable set of rules, and Bob Nordskog put together a race in Corpus Christi, Texas, which was the first Corpus Christi, Texas race, and it was called the East-West Shootout. So all the boats that came from the east came with an E in front of their number, and all the boats that came from the west came with a W in front of their number.
That's cool.
And the whole idea was that we would race for combined points, and whoever got the most points, they were the winners. East won or West won. Well, the West did win, and cool. It was
it's like the overall medals in the Olympics. Whoever's
Yeah, and if you were around there, you would probably remember Elaine Model. She was the person that helped us get it done eventually, and she's actually got a marketing company, and she actually discovered Eva Longoria, and she's kind of does that kind of stuff too. But anyway, she always says I was her first offshore handshake, because she came to meet us one night at the hotel in Corpus Christi when we're setting this thing up, and that's when I met her. So she actually put that race on for several years, but if you recall, she was also involved in OSS.
Yeah, I remember that.
So we started OSS. So that's where we met her. But then they had that Corpus Christi race every year, and after that, Pacific Offshore came back into play as Pacific Offshore. This was in 91. That was when we had that race. And so, I was, in essence, the second in command at Pacific Offshore, and, under Bob. And at the same time, we're doing all these things that, with Powerboat Magazine, and all kinds of endurance runs, San Francisco to Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Felipe to La Paz, Canada to Mexico. When it was Bob's birthday, you could never know what we're going to do. We're going to do something, setting diesel fuel.
Let's talk about Bob. So the way that I always think of Bob Nordskog is his name in the middle of a speedometer on the dash of a boat.
That's right.
So did he build multiple items for boats, or what did he do?
Just a few. He was a pioneer in a lot of things, and one of them was the suspension seats. He was probably the first guy that came up with a suspension seat, situation. It was more designed for, really rough riding boats when you're sitting down, not, of course, all of our offshore racing then was standing up.
Yeah.
And
so it'd be something that maybe the military would use or something like that.
Well, I think it was more just, trying a hobby thing. The whole speedometer thing, back in those days, there was no GPS.
Mm-hmm.
You had a speedometer, and the one speedometer company that was known was that was known by Keller, Keller.
Mm-hmm.
But their stuff was, expensive, hard to get. And Bob Nordskog figured out that he could take a gauge that's used on a fire sprinkler system, whatever, a water pressure gauge,
Mm-hmm.
and calibrate it and change the bezel and everything and make, speedometers out of it. So there's
a boat every once in a while that comes through that still has a Nordskog speedometer in it.
Yeah, it's a water pressure gauge. That's all it is, And then, of course, the pitot tubes and all that stuff. And they built all that and had kits and so forth. But most of the stuff was for our own racing. Now, we spent a lot of time setting records and endurance stuff like that. That was his thing. And never really got in. He had one drag boat, not really ever got into that, but a lot of the other stuff. So all through the 70s and 80s, I raced with him offshore. And then at the same time, I started running, Grand National in 1977. We would run that in the Parker Enduro. Now, originally the Parker Enduro was a 9-hour race. It starts at 8 in the morning and 5 in the evening. And
based out of Parker, Arizona, on the Colorado River,
on the Parker Strip, and it would start down at what is now is Blue Water, and it would go a 14-mile lap up and down the river. It would last all day. It got changed.
So
to
I assume there's like all kinds of spectators along the river, like the whole time.
Right. So it was like the Indy car. It was like the Indy race for boats. And
the start of the Parker Enduro is insane, right, Bob?
Yeah, they limited it to 100 boats, but they're all different classes.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, no, they people would be there were so many people that would sign up. It'd be alternate. So you would have to sign up like on January 2nd at the Parker Chamber of Commerce at 9 a.m. People would camp out all night in the winter, waiting, in a line to make sure they got a spot. And the first person gets pit spot number 1. And so, you camp there for a couple of days. Well, if you got to 100, then you become an alternate. And so if somebody pulled out or couldn't make it, then you get to race. But they limited it to 100 boats at the time. But it's 100 boats on a modified Le Mans start. Now, originally it was a Le Mans start where people would be at a fence and they'd run across the thing, jump in their boat and go.
Yeah,
but it didn't work out because there was a few of the teams were starting the boats before the guy got in it. So a Grand National race now is a modified Le Mans start where you're sitting on the beach and it's pretty crazy. You turn on your ignition and everything. You're sitting there, and in a Grand National boat, you got your cavitation plate pedal all the way down, and you got your throttle wide open, and your ignition's on. You push that button and hold on. That's how you start.
This episode of Boats and Bros has been brought to you by Performance Boat Center, where Myrick Coyle is the shop foreman. Myrick, what's happening over there at Performance?
Oh, more than you can imagine. So, paint shop, we're painting some new Performance power boats that have showed up, rigging. We're doing some stereo installs and upgrades to some center consoles, and then the rigging of the next Performance powerboat, the 36. That's going to be Rambo's. And so we got that going on. As you move over to the service department, Chance is in the drive room building drives. Justice is on the phone, just doing what Justice does. So we got that going on. Basically, we just hit a weekend where it's warming up. So from whatever didn't get done, whether it's maintenance or whether it's a re-rig of a boat or whatever, it's a very busy place. So since all that's going on, of course, sales is a huge part of our business. So whatever they need done, whether it's a delivery, an inspection, a mechanical inspection, whether it usually is like, compression checks, leak down tests, drive services, stuff to make sure that a person isn't buying a boat that isn't up to his standards. So, yeah, that's what's going on over there. It's starting to get busier on the weekends. We've had a couple of 70-degree days here, and it starts to get people antsy. I always say it's solar powered, and you can definitely tell Lake of the Ozarks solar powered. So
that's a great way to put it. So Performance Boat Center, with 2 locations to serve you, Osage Beach, Missouri, and South Florida.
That's
so
wild.
That's how that race would start, and you'd have 100 boats all going for the same place. And then
explain a cavitation plate. I've never driven a boat that has a cav plate.
Well, all the V-drive boats have a plate. A lot of them, the race boats have a plate.
And this is like what controls the trim, your attitude of the boat.
Exactly. And so it's a plate that's bolted in. It's bolted into a recess in the back of the hull, and you're actually bending the plate with so it comes out and you bend it. You push, in this case on the race boats, you push a pedal down and it forces the plate down, to bring the nose down. And
I see.
And it's got a spring override that pulls it up, and you can actually lock a handle or override it with your foot. I got one or two of those. You could drive and check it out.
Yeah. So
my Grand National boat right now, there is a limited class, but mine was set up lately to run the regular Parker Enduro, and it has a 1,200 horsepower motor in it, tuned down to 1,200 horsepower.
How long is this boat?
20 and a half feet.
1,200 horse, 20 and a half. Yeah. My bass boat's 21 and it's 250.
Well, my company started building V-drives because at that time, V-drives were one of the only places that you could put big power without tearing everything up. And it was a real thing then. So in the 70s, Teague Custom Marine, and me alone at first, and then another guy, started gathering. I built about probably 80 Spectra V-drives, not Spectre, but Spectra. And it was a company that was formed from some of the employees that didn't go to Havasu when Campbell Boats moved to Havasu. And so they came from Burbank originally, or Burbank and Glendale originally. And so they started this other company, Ed Sullivan and Bob DeLong. They owned a company called Spectre Color, and they were a magazine company, but they were boat enthusiasts. And so they decided they were going to start a boat company. And that's kind of how that went until they had a fire in 1980, which burned down the place. And I don't know how that happened, but it was the end of it. So from that point on, I started building Chiatas. And a Chiata is another really well-known V-drive boat, and probably one of the most popular 21-foot ski racing boats there is. And so in 1987, I built one for myself, and it was the first boat out of the current mold, 21-footer. And at that time, it had a Race Aero turbo motor in it that was all under the hatch, and used typical ski racing thing, but pleasure boat. I built several of them for different customers. And so I built one for myself, and in 97, I sold it to a guy in Ottawa, Canada, and for $90,000. That was a lot of money. And, 97.
Yeah, for a 21-foot boat in 1987. Right. Jeez.
So it was 97. I sold it to him, and about 8 years ago, I bought it back. And I brought it home.
Is this the boat that you take to that, what is it? It's like playing hooky day where you guys.
Yeah, hooky day. It's a hooky day boat. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it started out with a whole bunch of guys with flat bottoms and old V-drives and cruisers and stuff like that, but it's getting out of hand now because, we're bringing bigger boats. But that's kind of how it started out. But
in the Delta, right?
I brought that boat home, and I had to go up to I had to drive up through Syracuse up into Ottawa and bring it home, get it through customs and everything. And I brought it home, and I never even looked at it because the weather was bad. I just shrink wrapped it right there as soon as I got in the United States and towed it to Havasu. So I got there because we were going to another boat regatta, and so I brought it there and met the family, and uncovered it for the first time with like a time warp. So the guy took really good care of it. They only boat 2 months a year, and the heated and air conditioned garage up there, So anyway, I rebuilt. I brought it back, and basically I could have just, maybe refreshed the blower motor when it was at the time. He wanted a Brutes blown motor, and
how much you have to pay for it to get it back?
I can't tell that. Cheaper.
Okay, cheaper.
You know why? He wanted me to have it. So
that's
he actually
nice.
took less from me that he had an offer for. But So I brought it back and I took the motor out and I was going to refresh it. And the next thing, I'm going to make all the plumbing modern and I'm going to do all this. And then I refurbished the trailer, and ultimately I built a 1,310 horsepower Whipple charge motor and put back in it. So it's 21-foot boat with 1,310. I don't know how fast it is. Yeah, I do. It's got a 3-speed it's got they use a Turbo 400 in them with a spline drive that actually is a part that I invented originally, that Art Carr patented it. And so anyway, I just put it in third gear and drive away. You don't need any other gears, because back in the days when we had turbo motors, we used transmissions.
You had to get them to get on plane and all that.
And we didn't have a way to aerate and all that kind of stuff. And we did figure that out later, but not with the V-drive boats. Anyway, so the little boats are kind of how the company started. But, as time goes on, they get bigger. And of course, I had all the big boat influence with Bob Nordskog. We raced, we had a 35 Mistress, and then we had the first ever Kevlar 38 Scarab that was built by DuPont. And
that's cool.
And then we had 239 cigarettes. One was too heavy. It was Kevlar, but laid up at the wrong schedule, I guess. And so Don Arnold took it back and built us a 39 that was too light. And it was like driving a trampoline. You'd be going along, hung out, and all of a sudden to do something that you didn't ask it to do. So that's the boat we end up calling the CAM boat, which is the Canada, America, Mexico boat. And we put 735 gallons of fuel in that thing. And in those days, it was all transfer and everything. So all the records that we set, and probably the one that people are trying to go after right now and have been for years, is San Francisco to Los Angeles. And we did it in 5 hours and 57 minutes the last time. And what
kind of average speed is that?
About 81.
Jeez, for 5 hours.
Yeah. So,
and then how do you work the fuel situation, Bob?
Well, all transfer pumps and mechanical valves. So when the boats are originally built, the offshore boats of those days, and I think that maybe Bobby Moore was the first person to do it this way, because we actually had a boat that was rigged by Bobby Moore. He had fuel valves on the navigator, in front of the navigator, and there's 3 sets of fuel tanks in the boat. So you can select, all this plumbing come up to these valves. You could select which valve. We didn't have like electric valves and stuff like that then. It was all like mechanical valves. And you could select which tanks you're going to run off.
So it gave the navigator something else to do.
Yeah. Well, we had tanks on either side of us, where we stood. Yeah. And then we had tanks, right in front, forward of the bulkhead, and then another set of tanks, all the way to the back. So in this boat, we put 2 big belly tanks in it, and we also had a 90-gallon. Originally, it was designed to be a 90-gallon ballast tank all the way up at the beak, and we turned that into a fuel tank.
I bet you that thing when you took off was a pig.
Oh, it would actually twist like this because all the way.
I drove a 388 Skater today that had like extra large tanks in it, and it had 350 gallons of fuel in it today, and it was outboard rotation, which obviously inboard would have been better with all this fuel, but it just plowed. I'm just like, oh my gosh, with all this fuel in it. But I can't imagine. I'm talking 350, not however much you're talking, 900, 700.
My 44 holds 550 gallons.
Oh my gosh.
And I put it in it once to see what it would hold.
Yeah, you need some plaques. They call it the like Exxon Valdez. Then
yeah, it was like a big pontoon boat.
Yeah, just pushes everywhere.
Yeah. So we did that, but we did the San Felipe La Paz, which is after that trip, I swore I'd never go to Mexico again, and I did one more time. Now I know I'm not going back, and and we did that in 85. Was the San Felipe La Paz thing, and we set diesel speed records in Salton Sea. We did, just all this crazy stuff that we used to do.
Were you ever buddies with Howard Arneson at all? I know he
very
was
much so.
Really?
Yeah. So Howard and I, in fact, Howard, started. He's an inventor. one of the things he invented and was very well known is the pool sweep.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to work on swimming pools, and that thing would look like an octopus going around.
Yeah, right.
Inside there.
He actually, in 1977, we bought a home with a pool, and he sent us a pool sweep.
Oh, that's cool.
And so, but he actually went to our wedding.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. So neat. I've known him since I've known Bob. He was a good friend of Bob's.
I didn't know that. Yeah, that's cool.
So when we did that Canada to Mexico run, he was the official, the scorer who had to be where we started, and then they would take the clocks, all the clocks and everything to the finish place. And so the same kind of clocks.
They'd go to the airport and then get in an airplane.
Get on a plane. Yep.
Oh, wow, that's dope.
Yeah, and you got to remember, we did all this before there was GPS,
cell phones.
No cell phones, no GPS. This is all compasses, stopwatches, and charts, and that's how you do it.
You had to have so many oh shit moments through.
I was a navigator for Bob, and you got to make sure you're on course because you might get an ass chewing if you're not.
Yeah.
And so we're going from Canada to Mexico, San Francisco to Los Angeles, and we thought we were going to really be cool. This is when you could get a Loran, and so we mounted a Loran and thing. I studied all the lats and lawns and everything from the whole trip and everything, and he knew it too. And so we had this big box sitting there on the dash, and you could in some of the water you could barely read it because it's so rough, And
was it digital information, like a calculator or something?
No, yeah, it was like a line with latitude and a line with longitude, right?
Oh, wow.
And then you have to know what that meant. And so we're going along, and I'm looking at that thing, and I'm keeping track manually, with my stopwatches and our speed and where our checkpoints are. And I have a chart that's like a big roll of toilet paper, and it's all plasticide. And so you just follow your line on this chart, and you
just keep rolling it.
You tear off a sheet and throw it overboard and keep going.
Yeah.
And so we littered the whole ocean with sharps,
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, but so anyway, we're going along, and that doesn't seem right to me. The Loran, and the Loran was great. Like if you're sitting dead in the water somewhere in the ocean, you could find out where you were at exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But it don't keep up when you're going that fast. It's thinking about where you were about 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago.
It's trying to catch up.
Longer you go, it's an hour ago, And,
yeah.
So remember, we didn't have headsets and didn't send our helmets.
A lot of hand gestures.
We had a lot of hand gestures. Some of these,
what are you thinking, dumbass?
So Bob and I are getting into this argument with hands, and I go, I got it. I'm right.
Yeah.
And he's pointing to that, and I go, forget that, and he just keeps looking at it, and he just thinks that I'm wrong, and so I reach behind it and yank the wires out.
Yeah, I'll show you. Now you have to listen to me.
Okay, so now I could be a hero or a zero. Well, fortunately, I was dead on.
Oh, nice.
And not only was dead on that, but I was dead on our fuel calculation because it. I started realizing as the water got really pretty good, like around Santa Barbara, which was about 3/4 of the way down, that if we picked up the speed, we could do it under 6 hours.
And what you did.
What'd you say was 5 hours? That's huge because our run before was 6 hours and 49 minutes.
Yeah, beat it by almost an hour.
Yeah, so we didn't have great conditions. It started out raining, fog, everything else. It was horrible at Point Conception, but we just ran the dog crap out of it, And it was because Chuck Norris was trying to beat our record, and he actually made a pretty good attempt, got pretty close.
Really,
and so he was there. He was there that day when we got there, and so anyway. I said, pick it up. I go, I went like this, less than 6, like that, pick it up. And now I'm trying to make sure I'm getting all the fuel out of every tank, and bringing it back because I don't know if we got enough gas to run it that hard.
Yeah.
And
so when you were judging fuel consumption, was there any type of a gauge, or you just knew how many gallons per hour?
Nope.
Or, no.
Nope.
Wow.
We knew about what the fuel consumption would be on the motors, and what we did is we put single carbureted race aero turbo motors in it, so that it was one carburetor, twin turbo deal. The motors are like maybe 825 horsepower.
So like a 750 CFM or 850.
It had a single 830 on it.
A single 830.
Yep.
That's
right. And
that's
so
cool.
And so we just kept on going, and I'm looking and I'm transferring. Originally, if I'm transferring and I get a tank full, I'll get coming out the vents, and I ain't got enough fuel to do any of that. So I just started moving fuel back to the back tanks that we were running on. Just everything had the pumps on and all that stuff. We got to Marina del Rey and pulled in. When we pulled the boat out of the water, it had like 24 gallons of gas left in it.
Gee, so 12 aside.
Yeah, right. I know.
Yeah,
but it was just pure luck. It really was. And but
so I mean, how much faster was the boat at the end of the run compared to the beginning?
Well, a big old 39 cigarette needs to run on the tail to go fast.
Yeah.
And so you get all the, and remember, we're doing this like number 3 drives.
Yeah.
And 3-blade props.
You mean you didn't have 5-blade CNCs?
No. No one had ever heard of that, And when the 4 blades come out, people's minds were blown, and so we had 3-blade props on it. They were like 1829, something like that.
Yeah.
But if you were in a race, and remember our regular races were 250, 220 miles, and you would go to places that, no one's there. If you didn't make it back, for some reason, broke down, whatever, you had life rafts and EPIRB and
I remember you telling a story one time about going back out there after somebody and they were in a kelp bed or something like that, and you had to pull them out.
Yeah, that's right. We were in San Diego, and it just so happened that we were racing offshore in San Diego on one day, and the next day, Sunday, was a Parker Enduro.
Mm.
And so we had it all planned. We had an airplane waiting for us at the airport. We're going to run the offshore race, go to the plane, get on the plane, and make the driver's meeting in Parker.
Wow.
Well, so Bob and Noel Younger were in the Scarab, I think, and I was in one of the other boats, maybe the Magnum. So I finished, and Bob had a big Flybridge Magnum, or he had 2. He had a, like the big Magnums, the wide beam Magnums, right? He had 2 of them. He had it was called Ellie's boat. That was his wife. And anyway, we got back. He wasn't there. And so I got into Ellie's boat, and remember, no GPS, nothing, no cell phones.
Was it getting late in the day too?
It got dark.
Oh shit!
Yeah, so I'm backtracking on the race course with the big boat on the like if I was going backwards on the race course, and we used a thing called a range finding radio then, and it has a radio like a VHF, but had a antenna that you could rotate on the top, and it would help you find where the signal was coming from.
Like if they're tracking an animal out there, like they track an animal.
So I go out there and I go 10 miles and I stop in the engine. I stop in the middle of the ocean and shut off all the power so it's quiet. And I start transmitting, and then I finally got them. They heard me. They had the radio on, and I said, keep counting. I got the strongest signal and went that way. And then I stop, and then I get stronger signal and go that way. And I found them. They were in the middle of a kelp bed, and the boat had caught on fire. And so I took the anchor line and a couple of the fenders off the boat and tied them together and put the anchor line out back and drove it, about 250 foot anchor line, and drug it into the kelp bed so they could get it. We brought that boat back behind that Magnum on plane.
What kind of power was in the Magnum? Obviously big power.
No, it had like hot rod 454s in it. Back in the days they had, we had them all hopped up and everything. So the thing would go, it'd go 40 something, maybe 50. And then he had a 38 Flybridge too, the same kind of boat. And it was a gas boat, because we could go in there and hop up the motors and everything. And probably would have been better diesel, but it wasn't the thing then.
We did that.
Much fun. We got back. We still made the race. We had to get excused we had to have a special driver's meeting the next morning. We still made the race. Had a pretty good day in Parker with no sleep, and I'm trying to think. That was in the 70s, before I was racing Grand National. So, because when we started racing Grand National, then we had 3 inboard endurance boats plus my Grand National boat all racing out of the same camp. And
wow.
The inboard, the KT boats, or what they called ET boats, eventually was basically like a 350 cubic inch, 80 inch small block hot rod, naturally aspirated, and they're coupled to a number 2 Speedmaster on a tunnel boat. So a lot of these tunnel boats that used to be twin engine outboard boats, back in the days with the Havasu Classic and all that stuff, a lot of them got turned into inboard tunnels, which became its own class. And then a Grand National boat is a marathon V-drive boat like the one I have now, but it was a different boat that I had at that time. And so we raced all that stuff in addition to all the offshore stuff. So pretty crazy.
You must
times.
have quite the garage full of boats at the time.
Well, no, it was a 10,000 square foot boat shop that was Bob's hobby shop, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
And but he ran a tight ship, and he ran a really tight ship with the Pacific Offshore. And then unfortunately, he passed away 2 months after we won a race in Marina Del Rey in 1992. So
how old was he? How old was he when he passed away?
He was 79.
79.
And so at that point, it seemed logical for me to keep Pacific Offshore going because it was roaring and we're doing really good. And but we had no money because Ellie, had just basically the club's money did not come to the club, and because it was Bob's money. And so we started with nothing. And we basically, I just called people up, says, you're my secretary. You need to take the test to be a chief referee, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up being the president because I was the president, Yeah. And so we ended up with a complete volunteer organization that was the biggest party you could imagine. We put on 8 races a year on the West Coast. And that would also include Lake Mead and, a few other locations. But we put on 8 races a year from Seattle to San Diego. We had all these different places, and it was a blast. And you look back now at that, you go, you didn't realize how cool it was then. How much you just couldn't wait to go to the next race. You couldn't wait to be with all the people. And the one thing that we did is we always went everywhere as a group. Yeah. At the end of the day, we all went to the same restaurant. At the end of the day, we all, we had to figure out where we're going to go if there was enough room, we would take over.
Let the restaurant know ahead of time that we're coming.
Way ahead of time. Yeah. And so that was the cool thing. In probably 94, we brought 27 boats to Key West we caravan from California to Key West. And
that's a long ride.
Yep, it's 3,115 miles. And we won every class that year, except for the triple engine outboard. I guess that was a P class boat at the time. We didn't have any of those in California because our water was so rough and it would always rip the middle engine off the boat.
Yeah, so that was I told that story before. That was one of the fastest boats I had driven for a long time. It was a 32 skater stepping out. We had 300s on the back of it. But fast. I think it was like 114, 118, something like that.
But they weren't that great in really rough water. And our oceans out here can become, as big as houses. And you get big swell we would race as long as the conditions were safe for the patrol boats and stuff. That's the one thing you had to think about. But even then, our races were not circle races like they are now. That's kind of an evolution that, has come about, more for spectators and everything else. Our races were still over 100 miles, a lot of them were 150, whatever. And so, it was a good time. And, when we
it
got
makes sense. It makes sense how offshore got its name when you talk about races like that, because a lot of the times you talk about, we're offshore boat racers. Hell, we don't go more than a couple 100 yards from the beach,
Right. Yeah.
So it's not like we're really.
The poker runners come 150 miles and we go 50 miles in a circle.
Yeah, exactly.
This podcast is powered by Speedboat Magazine. Subscribe now at speedboat.com for 9 power-packed current issues a year direct to your mailbox.